Okay, so just a massive heads up before I go any further with this video. It is going to be quite long, and it's really only going to be useful for anybody out there who's kind of like super nerdy about things like, you know, SSDs and enclosures and Macs and stuff like that. If you're just a casual viewer, this video definitely won't be for you. However, if you are a geeky, nerdy type to do with the SSDs, enclosures and Macs and stuff like that, yeah, you might enjoy this video because it's a little bit of a head scratcher. Anyway, so what it is, I set out to do a video which is purely only to measure temperatures with one of the setups that have been used, and literally just to answer some questions that people had already asked in a couple of previous videos. However, when I started doing the testing, something weird kind of goes on in like the second test. So what it is, I've got the latest or the soon to be released ACASIS TB501 enclosure, which is this one here. And this is going to be compatible with Gen 5 or PCIe Gen 5 NVMe SSDs, such as the Samsung 9100 Pro here. So what it was, I've already done a video about them, but within that video, a couple of people had asked about like temperatures and stuff. So what I thought was, I know I'll do a serious stress test. So I'll put this combination together and feed it 4 terabytes from my RAID system. So basically shove the data into it as fast as possible with the highest speeds, but like 4 terabytes of it. And then do measurements of the temperatures before and after the data test is done, but then do it twice. One where the fan is in auto mode on the enclosure, and then the second test is when the fan is fully on, just to show what the differences are with the temperatures. Now we will repeat all this shortly because that's what I go into in the video. However, during the second test, some really weird things started going on to do with the SLC cache and the bit rates and stuff like that. So like I say, if you're into that kind of like weird stuff, this might be the video for you, but definitely don't bother watching this if you're not into like, you know, geeky, nerdy stuff. Anyway, let me get into this and I'll just come back at the end as well for a bit of an end summary. Okay, so getting into this then, and I'm just going to explain exactly what's going on here. Now, the first thing to mention is my camera here is not on the best tripod because of its position, so the camera might wobble a little bit during the testing, but don't worry about that. It's not going to interfere with the test. And also the camera is on autofocus as well there, as we can see. So hopefully the autofocus is going to snap to whatever it is that I'm pointing at and stuff. Now, it may not be picking up the screen off the MacBook so well, and this is an M4 Max MacBook Pro. However, that's not a problem because I'm simultaneously recording the picture output to my Atomos Ninja, so I will cut away to that when we need to look at stuff that's actually on the Mac. Okay, so what I'm using here for the source disk, which is the disk where I'm going to be transferring files from, is a RAID 0. Now, the RAID 0 consists of a TB501 by ACASIS with a 4 terabyte Western Digital SN850X with inside of it, and that is connected directly to the MacBook. Now, the second disk to make up this RAID is an ACASIS TB501 Pro, and that also has a 4 terabyte SN850X with inside of it by Western Digital. Now, the combination of those two drives and SSDs means that I can get 8 terabytes worth of RAID 0. Now, this particular SSD here, the second one in the set, is being plugged into my Avanki Thunderbolt 5 docking system here, and that's basically so I can power this drive here. And the reason why I'm doing that is because the MacBook will not like power 3 separate drives on its own. So what I'm doing is taking the power away for one of the drives here, which is the second one in the RAID set, so then the MacBook doesn't struggle for power. And then what I'm doing after that is to connect the target drive here directly to the Mac. Now, the target drive consists of the Samsung 9100 Pro SSD. Let me just see if we can get that there. And that's also inside the new and soon to be released ACASIS TB501 Pro, and the new version of the TB501 Pro is going to be PCIe Gen 5 SSD compatible. Now, I'm not entirely sure when this is going to be released because I've obviously got one in advance, but I'm going to use this one because, you know, moving forward, this is probably going to be like, you know, the enclosure of choice for 80 gigabits Thunderbolt 5 for anybody looking at the ACASIS enclosures. Okay, so that's basically all of that stuff explained. Now, I'm going to flip over onto the Mac in a second and run some testing, but before I do that, let me see if I can get some temperatures here, and hopefully we can see the temperature on here. Okay, so running idle, as it were, I'm on 37 degrees there on the SSD. I'm just going to run across the NAND and the controller chip there. So between the controller chip going across the NAND, it's around 39 degrees Celsius. Hopefully we can see that there properly. Now, that is a bit high. However, my ambient room temperature is quite high as well. So the ambient room temperature is definitely going to be, you know, making other things a bit warmer here. Now, let me just point this at the table and let's see what we can see here. So, well, actually, the table's cool. Actually, the table's only like, what, 29 degrees, but the ambient room temperature is quite warm, hence why that there in, like, you know, it's kind of like, you know, standby mode, as it were, is 38, 39 degrees. Okay, now what I'm going to do is to put the lid back on it. In fact, the lid being on it would have cooled it down, but I've left the lid off it so I could show you what was inside. Now, as far as the actual lid is concerned, I've got two. Let's say I've got two thermal pads on the inside here, and they are the two thermal pads, a 1mm and a 0.5mm, that come with the actual enclosure. So let me just pop that on there. Okay, and make sure to place it down so the fan is facing up, not down, because if the fan's facing down, that's not going to be good for cooling. Okay, so with all that explained now, what I'm going to do is just to flip over now onto the Mac and show you some stuff here. Okay, so as far as the Mac is concerned, I think what I will do here is just to run a couple of quick disk speed tests using the Blackmagic app, which is there, and this is just to give you an idea of the speeds of the drives as they stand. Now, if I just go to select target drive, I'm going to come down to, let's see, the RAID. Yeah, that's the RAID set there. So let me open that and run a test. So what we're going to see here are quite fast speeds with the RAID set. So as we can see there, the write speed on the RAID set is over 8,000 megabytes per second, and the read is over 9,000. In fact, the read is getting close up to 10. Now, it's the read speed on the RAID right now which we're more interested in, because we're going to be reading from the RAID to the test drive, or the drive that I'm testing for the temperatures and stuff. And obviously, with that being almost 10,000 megabytes per second, it's going to be way faster than the target drive for the test. So let me just flip over to the target drive for the test, and that is going to be this one here, the TB501 Pro 9100 Pro. Okay, so that's the 4TB test drive. So let me just run this. Now, this is going to be fast, as you can see, over, well, nearly 6,500 megabytes per second for the write, and the read speed is almost 6,000 megabytes per second, or just short of it. Now, as you can see there, because that write speed is really fast, we do need to have something really fast to read from, basically, so I can proper stress the drive as it's being written to. And as we've already seen, the read speed for the RAID is almost 10,000 megabytes per second, so easily fast enough to flood the bandwidth for the write speed for the target drive. So let me come out of there. Now, I'm just going to show you here the folder. Actually, as we can see here, so ACASIS 8TB RAID 0. So that's our source drive, and then the drive at the bottom is the test drive. Now, as far as the source drive is concerned, let me just get on to showing you the structure of the test folder. As you can see, the test folder here is 4,000,002 megabytes in size. It's got 57 items in it, and those items are basically a load of ProRes 422HQ video files in 4K 60. I'm making a point of showing you what those files are, just so that you know that what I'm using here is going to be typical of what a lot of people might want to use external drives for, which is high capacity, high bandwidth video codec files. Okay, so with that said, and I've just closed down the folder like an idiot. Okay, so with that said, what I'm going to do then is to move the folder over. In fact, let me just start doing this and I'll explain what's going on. So drop start. Okay, so I'm moving the folder from the RAID 0 over to the test drive, which obviously is the TB501 Pro new version with the 4TB Samsung 9100 Pro in it. And what this is going to do now is to shove 4 terabytes of data in one go at the fastest possible write speeds that this Samsung can write it at. So we're proper stress testing here. There's kind of like no messing around. We couldn't stress this drive any worse than what I'm about to do now, which is basically to fill it up. And I think when it fills up, it's going to be something like 80 megabytes short of being full. And as we could clearly see, there was over 4,000 megabytes in that folder. So like I say, there's no messing around here. This is absolutely like being brutal with the drive. Actually, one last thing I forgot to mention as well. The target drive here has got 2 fan modes. One is automatic and one is manual. I've actually set it to automatic for this run. So basically in automatic, what happens is that the fan will only switch on when when the enclosure senses that the SSD needs the fan to be switched on. So for the best part, the enclosure is actually quiet or like, you know, silent during the testing, and it'll only be as it goes through that it will switch the fan on. Now I can't give you any idea of the fan noise here because there is actually 5 different things on the table here with fans in. So if you do hear fans going on, that's going to be the combination of 5 different fans. However, and to be like super precise about this, at the moment the fan isn't even on inside the enclosure. So this first run of the test is definitely just going to give us an idea of the worst case scenario for the temperature with the fan being in auto. And then what I will do is run a second test with the fan permanently on, and let's just see what the differences are with the temperatures. Anyway, with all of that said, what I'm going to do now is just speed through this until I get to the end of, you know, this data dump, and then what we'll do, we'll get a bit of temperature reading for the SSD with inside the enclosure. Okay, so I'm going to come back in here because I think this will be finished shortly. So yeah, there we go, 10 seconds or so. So let me just hold on for this, and then I'm immediately going to just like pull the back off the enclosure, and then let's do a quick reading of the SSD. I'm not going to, oh, there we go. Hold on, let me just whip this off. So, and this isn't something that you should do, but I'm going to do it anyway. Just whip it off there, and then let me get in with the temperature reading. And as we can see, 57, 56, 59, 56. I think that's the controller chip there. So that's what, 58, 53, 54. In fact, what I'll do, let me just run across the SSD here, and we should get a really good idea. What it is, it hasn't gone above 60 degrees Celsius, as we can see there. Hopefully I'm in focus. What it is, I can't actually see the camera as I'm doing this, so hopefully it is picking it all up properly. But as we could see there, the highest temperature reading at one point was probably around 58 degrees. So that was, you know, I think that's really good actually. But what I'm going to do, I'll talk about that in the end summary. So what I'm going to do now is basically stop this. I need to let everything cool down. I've got to save a bunch of data. Then I'll redo the exact same thing, but with the fan permanently on. Okay, so to the second test then, and this time I'm going to have the enclosure with the fan permanently on, so it's not in auto. Now, I've not got it disconnected here, it's cooled down a fair bit, so let's just get a start off reading. So we're about 29 degrees there. Let's see, hopefully that's being focused on. Like I said, I can't see the screen properly that I'm recording with, so 28, to 29 degrees, something like that. Okay, so let me just put it back together again. Now the other thing that I'm going to do here, just in case anybody might be wondering as to whether or not the Mac was acting like a bit of a heat sink because I had the SSD resting on it, for this go, I'm going to put the SSD on top of a plastic case here. So definitely plastic is not something that's going to absorb any of the heat properly off that. So if anyone was wondering whether it sitting on top of the Mac was like, you know, heat was being transferred to the Mac, which it will have done, but not enough to have cooled it down, I'm going to put it on the plastic this time. Okay, so what I'm going to do is connect it first. Let me just wait until it appears on the desktop, and then I'll just line everything up. Then what I'm going to do is just quickly let you hear that the fan is on. So let me just position that. That's fine. Now the only other problem here is that my Atomos Ninja is absolutely on full blaze now with its fan, so that's definitely going to be getting in the way of things as far as noise is concerned right now, although this is not a noise test. So what I'm going to do here, the drive's connected obviously. Now the thing with these particular enclosures by ACASIS, as standard, when they are connected, the fan goes into auto mode, so you won't hear any noise, and then the fan will switch on when the temperatures rise, as I explained before. But what we do, we just hold the fan button down for a few seconds there, and then when we do that, that puts the fan on full now. So what I'm going to do here is just to give ourselves an idea that the fan is on. So I'm just going to put the microphone right up to it. Okay, so we definitely move the mic back to my face. Okay, so we should definitely have heard that the fan was definitely on there. Now don't worry about whatever that fan noise sounded like, because I was pointing the mic straight into the vent, so it will be loud. This is actually a quiet enclosure, and I will be doing a video about how quiet this one is. In fact, I'll do a video soon comparing all three of the ACASIS enclosures that I've got to give people an idea of what the fan noise is like. Anywho, so let me quickly get back onto this. So what I'm going to do is drag this folder back over and hit start again. Now what I'm doing here obviously is I've deleted the data by formatting the 4 terabyte again. So we've definitely got a clean drive to play with here. Now also on the previous take there, I didn't actually stop the stopwatch right at the end, although I will have noted the timing and you will have seen it as soon as the files had moved over, and I think I'll do the same this time as well. I won't try and stop the stopwatch because we're going to see what it does anyway, you know, at the end of the actual data dump, and then I will just use those timings at the end, because although this is not a bitrate test, it might just be worth doing some bitrate calculations anyway. And also as well, the other thing to look at here is the data written as well, because as we can see, this is super fast, because this is the fastest that we are ever going to get out of 80 gigabits per second or Thunderbolt 5 compatible SSD with one of these new ACASIS enclosures with a PCIe Gen 5 SSD inside of them. And also when it does drop down, we are definitely going to see the speed for the long-term NAND storage, and that's something that you will have seen on the previous take as well. Anyway, with all that said and done, let me just speed through this and get the reading at the end. Okay, I'm just going to come back in here now because I've noticed a massive difference there, and you probably have done as well. I haven't got a clue why this is happening. However, we run out of the SLC cache on the Samsung a lot quicker than what we did on the first test. And as we can see there, as far as the data written speed is concerned, that's now about 250 megabytes per second slower than what it was earlier on the first test. So to be clear, on the first test it was hitting about 1.6 gigabytes per second or so, and that's obviously once the SLC cache has run out and the data is being written direct to the long-term NAND storage or the TLC. Now at this point here, what we're seeing is about 1.4, so that's definitely slower And also we ran out of the SLC cache quicker here. You probably noticed that anyway if you were keeping an eye on the progression bar at the top there as well. So yeah, I'm going to keep this in actually, because I want to be as transparent as possible with these tests. However, I've got to say right now, I have not got a clue what's going on there. And I've got to be honest and say, I can't see this being an issue with the RAID, okay? Because as we've already seen, the RAID speed is absolutely ridiculous. So whatever's going on here to do with this speed, this has got to be something to do with either the enclosure, the SSD, or possibly even the Mac, although I would say that the possibility of the Mac being the problem is probably the least problematic of it all. So I don't know. I mean, the only problem is, you know, I'm just talking off the top of me head here, and I could be saying the wrong thing, so I've got to be careful what I say. However, my initial assumption here is that there is something going on between either the SSD or the enclosure, or a combination of both, because this is clearly slower, and technically speaking, this should be exactly the same. Right, what it is, on the first test there was no thermal throttling going on or anything like that, and we clearly seen that because the long-term TLC NAND storage speed was like maintained right to the very end once it hit it after the SLC had depleted. However, what we're seeing right now is still definitely not thermal throttling, because the fan's permanently on, and we're hardly into the test when it done it anyway, and I can guarantee you that this is not thermal throttling. I mean, in fact, you know what I'll do? Let me not guarantee anything, let me just prove it. So I'm going to take the back off here while I shouldn't do this while it's working in case I disconnect the SSD. Luckily I haven't. And now let me just do a quick reading. As we can see there, the temps are in the low 50s. Let's have a quick look. Hopefully I'm in focus. There we go. So look at that, 47, 49, and it's getting up to mid 50s or 56, 57. That temperature is going to carry on rising now because the back plate isn't on, but that temperature was basically maximum mid 50s. So what I'm saying is that's definitely not thermal throttling. So there is obviously something else going on here, which I'm not entirely sure what it is. Anyway, oh, look at that. The speed's now dropped right down to 900 megabytes per second. Right, it's gone back up to 1.4. Oh dear. Like I say, I just want to be as transparent as possible here, because, you know, if there's something in the chain here that's not working properly, people have to know about that, although right now I can't tell you what that is. Okay, so what I'm going to do, I'll let this carry on for a little longer. However, I just may not have enough card space to continue the recording if it keeps going this slow. Let me leave it for a bit and I'll see what it's doing, okay? Okay, I'm just going to come back in here quickly again, because as we can see, every now and then that speed does go back up to over 1.6 gigabytes per second. However, it's dropping down, as we can see, to 1.49 and 1.58 and stuff. So it has gotten slightly faster again, but 1.72. Right, so I'll give it a few more minutes, okay? I'll carry on speeding through for a few minutes and we'll see what happens here. However, I doubt very much I'm going to let this go right to the end, only because we've already seen something here which I can't explain why it's happening. But let's just see if anything else happens and it might pick up again a bit further, although I doubt it very much. Although right now it seems to be hovering around 1.6 to 1.78, which is where it was earlier on the first test, once it did hit the SLC NAND. Once it hit the TLC NAND, that is the long-term storage, and it's going up to 1.85. Right, let me give this a few more minutes, okay, speeding through, and we'll see where it gets up to. Right, I'm just going to come back in here right now because, yeah, this is really odd. Right, as we probably noticed just before this point that where we're at now, the TLC speed started increasing. It was going up to like 1.7, 1.8, 1.9, which may in the long run have equaled the same speed overall for the entire 4 terabytes. However, what we are seeing now is 6.7 gigabytes per second. Okay, so I'm just going to hazard a pure guess here. Now, it's definitely going to drop down again, and it's dropping down to 1.2 or so. Now, we might see that come back up to 1.6 again. I'm not too sure, but I'm going to take a big guess here. Now, I'm not entirely sure exactly how the SLC routine is working with this particular Samsung SSD, and I've got to say right now it does feel like it's the SSD and nothing else. So as we've seen on the first test, the SLC went right the way through, depleted, and then we never seen any big spikes again in the bit rate. And what we've just which is exactly what we would have expected. But what we've seen here is a shorter initial period of like the fast speed with the SLC. Then it went down to like a lower speed than what it was on the first go as far as the TLC was concerned. I've obviously already done a test to make sure nothing was overheating, and it definitely wasn't. But then what we've seen is that it slowly crept back up again, and then we hit the full speed again, over 6 gigabytes per second. So again, I'm only guessing here, but it would appear to me that the SSD itself within its controller is probably trying to balance out and struggle with the SLC, because obviously it is one big continuous dump. Why we didn't see it the first go, I don't know. However, what I'm going to do here, because I think I've still got enough time left on my card and also on the Ninja, I'll let this go through. Hopefully I can take the whole thing, because it'll be interesting to see what it does right at the very end. Because if the timing is similar to the first take, then all this might be saying is, for any given amount of data, like massive amount of data like this, it might just even itself out over a very long period, because this will be a very long period of time. However, the speed now is down to 800, 900 megabytes per second, so I'm not entirely sure whether that's going to be true either. Okay, look, I'm just going to speed through this anyway, and obviously at this point, anybody who's watching this, you're going to be pretty nerdy like me, so as weird as what these results are, I'm fairly sure they're going to be interesting for some people out there, and maybe some other people have got their opinions as to what's going on. Anyway, and nonetheless, let me just speed through this now and see if we can pick that speed back up again. Okay, I'm just going to dive back in really quickly again, because as we can see here, the speed has picked back up again. It's going back up to like that 1.8 mark as well. So, and there you go. It's gone back up to 6 gigabytes again. Right, I'm totally confused right now, because from my understanding, once the SLC cache has been depleted, the drive needs to have some kind of pause in order for it to refresh the SLC cache. And then obviously once it fills up even further, the SLC becomes less and less. Now this behavior that we're seeing here, as far as I'm concerned, is one, it's totally unexpected, but two, I've never seen an SSD do this before, where on one continuous long data dump, the SLC will seemingly have refreshed itself for a bit. It obviously hasn't totally refreshed itself, because we're back down to a slow speed again. But like I say, I'll continue going through with this, because I'm just interested to see what it does by the time we get to the end, just to see if it does somehow average itself out to a similar speed as the first take. Okay, let me just carry on with this. Okay, I'm just going to come in again quickly here, because as we've seen, it went up to about 1.8. Now it's gone back up to 6.6 gigabytes per second. Again, I'm totally lost. I haven't got a clue what's going on here, because this is not the type of behavior that I've noticed before in any test that I've done, where I've done like 4 terabyte testing. What you have to understand is that although I have not done many videos about 4 terabyte testing like this, I actually do this quite a lot with all of the different setups that I have before I do any videos, because I just do my own personal stress testing. And I've got to say, I've never seen this before. Now, as it happens, with these peaks here going up to 6.8 and then like the odd ones going up to like 1.5, 1.6 and so, they may actually average out for those bursts of really fast speeds. It may average out the slower speeds to be like, you know, something similar for the overall, like, you know, data dump, which is the reason why I need to continue with the test, just to see if it does actually end up being close to the first test. Anyway, let me speed up through this again. Okay, I'm going to come back in here and get ready to test the temperature as soon as this is done. It should be done really quickly now, and we'll get a note of the timing because we can see it on the screen anyway. I just need to dig in as quickly as I can onto the SSD. So if you give us a moment, this should be done shortly. Oh, come on, hurry up. Right. Definitely be there we go. Okay, so straight in. Now what I'm going to do is just whip off the back there and let me get straight onto it. And interestingly, this is hotter. Okay, right, hopefully we can see this here. So we're hitting up to that hit 72 just then. Now it is going to quickly start dropping off a bit, so we definitely seen it go over 60, and at one point it hit 72. The reason why it's going to start dropping off is because obviously it's not writing anymore. But as you can see there, that is clearly hotter than what it was when the SSD was set to be auto on the fan, which doesn't make any sense at all. However, I've still got to double check to see how long the test actually took to do. So if you give us a second, I just want to work some stuff out, and then I will just do a quick end summary. Okay, so to an end summary then, and this is probably going to be quite short, to be honest, because I'm still really confused, so there's not really much else that I can say beyond what I was talking about during the video there on the second test. However, let me just get some definites out of the way. So for test 1, that took 32 minutes and 12 seconds, and we were basically transferring 4 terabytes. So the bitrate for that particular test was 2070 megabytes per second. Now you have to understand here, that's an average across 4 terabytes. So whilst the drive is definitely capable of doing like over 6,000 megabytes per second, once the SLC cache gets depleted, it's obviously going straight into its long-term TLC then, hence why the bit rates drop right down and why we get this average. And as we could see in the video as well, it was kind of averaging about 1.6 gigabytes per second or 1600 megabytes per second once we did hit the TLC. So to have the average of 2070 across the entire 4 terabytes is actually really good. Now as far as test 2 was concerned, yeah, I don't know what was going on, but that ended up taking, what was that, 37 minutes and 6 seconds. So it was obviously longer. I'll talk about it a little bit in a second, but that ended up being 1796 megabytes per second across the average. Now again, the average across 4 terabytes worth of data and it being 1796 megabytes per second is actually really good. Most 4 terabyte SSDs can't sustain anything like that as an average across 4 terabytes of data written. So even though test 2 was obviously problematic, it still had great results, but test 1's results are absolutely awesome in the long run for the 4 terabytes. Let me just get that out the way. Now, again, I can't really add anything beyond the pure speculation and confusion that I was talking about within, like, you know, during the running of test 2. But let's just make a couple of things clear here. It definitely wasn't thermal throttling that was causing that lower speed, because I broke into the SSD when we first started seeing those lower speeds, and we were only in the mid 50s. And as far as the first test was concerned, its maximum, what was it? It was that in mid-50s or 60 at the highest, whatever it was. Again, all massively well within the temperature range for this particular SSD, being the Samsung 9100 Pro. So yeah, as far as the temps were concerned for the first test, absolutely great. You know, there was no problem there, and obviously we didn't see any issues anyway as far as bit rates were concerned. But with the second test, once we did see the issues with the bit rates, which happened fairly quickly, like I say, I broke into the SSD, quickly tested it, and it was in the mid-50s, absolutely nowhere near thermal throttling. And to be honest, when we got to the end, and that was the big surprise, because we got to the end, and that did go quite high up. You know, I think it was averaging mid-60s, but it peaked slightly over 70, I think, right at the very end of test 2. Again, though, that's still not thermal throttling like temperatures either. These drives can easily go just over 80 without thermal throttling anyway, or 80 is there about the maximum. So we were definitely within that for like both of the tests and stuff. So I can't say that thermal throttling was like part of the issue here. However, and as you probably might have kind of like guessed as I was going through and I was kind of trying to work out what was going on, I kind of did start pointing more towards the SSD. Now, I'm not saying for sure anything about the SSD. However, as that test was going on test 2, in the back of my head, I just suddenly started remembering some of the things that I had issues with the previous Samsung 990 Pro, which is only a Gen 4 NVMe. And anybody who's familiar with my channel will know I did a couple of videos with it, but then I stopped using it, and I stopped, like, I wouldn't recommend it to people because I'd had a number of problems with it, quite specifically to do with heat and stuff. However, the 990 Pro, which is something that Windows users can attest to, it had a massive problem with its firmware, and there had to be firmware updates to the 990 Pro before it eventually got to the point where it was a stable SSD. That started doing all kinds of weird things like reporting the wrong amount of like data written and stuff like that, and of course the temperature thing. Now, moving on to the 9100 Pro, it was only because I'd had like weird issues with the 990 Pro in the past that towards the end of test 2 there, I'm thinking, I just hope there's nothing wrong with this 9100 Pro, do you know what I mean? And don't get me wrong, I'm not trying to throw Samsung under the bus here or anything, do you know what I mean? It's just that I can only go by previous results with things. However, I have to say though, the 9100 Pro immediately is actually running cooler than the 990 Pro. And that's actually a big deal because the 990 Pro is only Gen 4 and the 9100 Pro is Gen 5. So it actually does run cooler straight off bat. But obviously it's with inside, you know, an actively cooled enclosure as well. Anyway, yeah, I could carry on rambling on here about things, and still I don't know what the answers are. But that second test, test results was yeah, really surprising and a big head scratching. And in between me stopping the test and like previewing some of the footage, you still can't think of anything on top of whatever it was I was already saying, which you can add to the equation. However, what I would like to know is there anybody out there who's had like the 9100 Pro in any type of system, and have they had any issues at all, or is it really a solid SSD? In which case, I'm gonna have to start scratching my head again. Anyway, yeah, so like I say, this video from the outset, I did say this was for nerdy types and stuff, do you know what I mean? So if anybody's got this far into the video, you are a nerdy type, and thank you very much for watching the video and stuff. Anyway, there will be some more videos coming up soon with more conclusive, positive results to do with like the newer ACASIS enclosure and a few other things. And I'll be also testing some Thunderbolt 80 gigabits per second USB 4.2 cables and stuff like that for anybody who's into that kind of thing. And I will also be doing some fan testing or noise testing and stuff like that. Anyway, I'm David Harry. Thank you very much for watching this video. Take care and goodbye now.